Okay, so today we're going to talk about welding on handles instead of pulling points. And what I want to come up with is this. Two quarter tubes broken down into eighths so that I have a small handle. It's a 9.5 millimeter heavy wall that gives me a little bit of rotational advantage, a little bit of gearing to it so I can turn it smoothly. 1 inch you can almost turn it by hand just fine, but if you get any bigger than that it really does become awkward. Here's some larger diameter stuff, and you see that out there trying to hold it and roll it evenly, it's a little bit clumsier. So it's one thing to pull these down, but when you're working them you want to have a much thinner handle welded in there so that you can really get your fingers around it and spin it nice and smooth once it's welded together and this piece is removed. So that's what we're going to do. And just to keep it simple, here we got some high-tech graphics. We want to wind up with these two tubes here. Depending on whether or not it was the end one where we cut it off and leave a little bleb on the end and pull it out, or the next one where we snap it off and then blow that snapped end out after we seal it up, will create this profile. And then the other one where we just draw it apart after the flame cut, it'll leave this little handle here, which I actually find useful. You can rest it in your hand while making this weld here. It's really nice for that. It's easy to weld up a punty to later. This one here, you just got to be a little cautious with it when you apply the heat to it. I can put instantaneous heat here, but I have to be a little bit more gentle when applying heat to this. So something to keep in mind. The first step, we're just going to take the big long tube, we're going to score it and apply some pressure on the ends, holding that in the center, and it'll pop nice and even. Then we're going to flame cut each of those halves. That's this step here. We're going to let those cool, and then we're going to shape the end of this one down and this one open, flare it open, MARVER that one closed, and then we're going to weld them together in the flame, and then immediately move over to this area here and heat it up and condense it, and then we're going to snap it off as it cools when we pull it out of the flame. And that's going to leave us this one here that we can heat up that end and blow that out so that we've got a sealed up one. That's this one here now. And then we've got this one here left, which we just take a handle and weld it to, and we're done, giving us these here. And that's what we wanted to begin our projects. Most of my projects begin with tubing. So let's get to it. Here's a big, oh, what is it, a 4-foot length of 25 mil cobalt tubing, one of my favorites. A lot of people like cobalt. Going to find the center just by hooking it on the little glass cutter and letting it hold the weight and looking for center. So I'm just kind of making a balance scale out of that. Then I'm going to rest it on my leg, push down firmly. It's easy to get leverage there. It's just sitting on my knee, and I've always got the little rag or something underneath of it. You don't want the glass dust getting on your pants all the time, or you'll quickly wear a hole in all of your trousers. So I'm just giving it a little bit of turn, add some water to it, makes it snap a little easier. Boom, there's a nice, really clean, popped in half. So then the next step would be to flame cut that into half. So we'll do that. I think I'll do white. We'll just pretend like that. No, we'll stick with the blue since we started it. So I like using my little scissor jack rollers. They're adjustable, and I find them very helpful in stabilizing the tubes while I'm working. You don't have to have them, but yeah, they make life a little easier. The reason I decided not to use the white, it thermal shocks more. I can get to this more quickly, and we can speed the video up just a little bit. I know they're already running kind of long for some of these procedures, which is why I'm breaking them into sections. So this will just be how to weld up the 9.5 heavy wall handles to 1-inch tubing. so that you have a piece that's prepared to become your next project. Alright, we'll do a little voiceover here to avoid that loud torch noise. Just rotating this thing in the flame, one spot, just make a fine ring of heat on that. We're not really pulling, but it's going to condense down and become solid in the center, at which point we'll cut it in half all the way just using the flame. Now where it forms the pointy end, it's going to leave a bleb on it. So just to even up the wall thickness and make everything straight and symmetrical, touch those together and then slowly pull them and rotate them out. They'll become perfectly centered, and then cut them apart. And that is really easy to weld up to a 4 mil or a 6 mil punty in the future. You can even do it from room temperature, and the way that the heat spreads does not cause it to crack. So that's kind of nice. So anyway, we're going to set these aside and let them cool. We don't want to burn ourselves by picking up the hot ones. So here's another one that was just like it, that was cut off a few minutes ago and set down. So we'll move over to that. I'm going to set this one here. Then we're going to get the 9.5 handle and weld that up to the 1-inch cobalt. I'm going to heat up the 9.5, just you can put that right into the flame immediately. It can take the stress. The used flame that's kind of running around it is a little cooler, and I use that to preheat the cobalt a little bit before putting it right into the flame there. Use the little corner of the Arrowhead Marver to flare that out. And then I'll use a marvering pad to marver down the end of the 1-inch to meet it in size. It takes quite a bit of heat to get that cobalt moving. There we go, marver it down. And you get really good at estimating these sizes. They'll line right up after just doing a few. Okay, a little bit of intense flame on the cobalt, and it's more directed towards the larger tube rather than the 9.5. You put too much heat on the 9.5, it'll fall apart on you. So really heat that up, get the weld nice. Then I'm going to lift it out, put it down on the marvering pad with the backing plate and rotate it, which is really going to true it up and make the outside wall really smooth and even. The inside will blow out and then be even on the inside also, resulting in a really nice smooth weld. And then a long slow puff to even that out. Now it looks like I got the neck a little too thin there, so I'm going to reheat that and blow that out a little bit. There we go. Now it's got a nice good taper to it. I like the way that looks. Just going to keep rotating it until it's really firmed up. If you set these down too soon, they'll bend right there. So again, there's that little bleb on the end, and you can see I can just put the point of it in my palm. Makes it really frictionless to spin. Just keep rotating this until I'm sure that that's cooled enough that I can apply pressure to it without it distorting, and then we're on to the next step, which is going to be dividing this piece into half again. So here we go. There's half of it, more or less. Get it in there, and again you can see that little end out there up against the palm, resting against the scissor jack rollers, holds it in just the right position so that I can keep the flame lined up on one spot, not wander back and forth. Alright, just applying a generous amount of heat here right around just the center of the tube. Kind of drive it in there. We're going to try to condense down that center section so that it is not closed, but it's about the size you'd want to weld up to your next 9.5 handle. And the nice thing is this gets real brittle at just the point before it sets completely. So even though the cobalt is bigger and thicker, it'll be fragile enough that you'll be able to pop that right in half. I like to use a MARVER ring paddle to kind of give it a little specific orientation right there. There's going to be that snapping point. Now there's still quite a bit of mobility to the material. It's still like taffy, and as it stops being like taffy, it'll become brittle and it will just snap off, leaving you with the two ends, which are now almost the 9/5 size, ready to weld up. The one on the right, that's the one that we're going to seal up. Alright, we'll apply a generous amount of heat at the end of that tube, and the heat will go a long ways towards closing up the hole. Sometimes you can do it completely with just the flame, but if you MARVER it down there together, that helps. It really quickly pushes the lips together and you can puff it out. Blowing that out just a little bit to make that into uniform wall thickness. You just kind of got to get a feel for it on the darker colored tubes because they're opaque enough it's difficult to see their thickness, especially if you're talking opaque white or opaque black. You just don't have a clue by visual. You just got to kind of experience it, feel it, and do it a bunch of times. So then that's going to go into the oven. This is our last piece here to weld up, and we just grab a little handle there. We're going to flare it out so that it welds up in one pass. I'll MARVER that down to make it all symmetrical before I give it a little puff to blow it out. There we go. Nice and even, good clean joint, won't fracture, won't pop off when applied to fresh heat. Inline, straight, reliable. You can plug these into your blow hose. They'll always be the right size. I rarely ever break them. And they're reusable. They're almost infinitely reusable. You can, when they get too short, weld 3 of them together and cut them in half, and you're back to a good usable handle. When they start looking like bamboo, throw them away. But up until that time, you can reuse these 9/5 handles much more efficiently than with pulling a PUNTY and wasting part of your original material, turning it into a handle that is of varying dimensions, to say the least about it. Some of them are just downright flimsy. You can't get good at them, but again, not reusable, so why even bother? I like welding on a reliable handle that always fits my blow tube and I know isn't going to drop my piece when I go to work on something. So then the other part that we had was the other half, which had the rounded end on it. Let's see if I can find one of those. Boy, I do not. I used all those up. So anyway, the other one has the rounded end on it, but it follows exactly the same setup, and you've got your tube ready to go out there on your handle. All kinds of fun projects can be done with these. You can make perfume bottles, you can make pipes, you can make Christmas ornaments, you can make goblets. The list just goes on and on. Just be creative with it.